Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other, and today's episode is Deathnote Live Action Episode 2. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happened in this episode. So the beginning of the episode picks up where the last one left off with Misa's concert, and outside of the concert, Ryuk asks Light what he's going to do about his stalker. And this is again where we see Ray. Then we get a few scenes of Light going through his life as he subtly keeps glancing and finding Ray behind walls, around corners, in the distance, trying to hide himself. And this is what leads him to start to experiment with the rules of the Death Note in order to try to overcome his stalker, because he needs to try to find the stalker's name. Ryuk does tell him about how Shinigami can see lifespan, but he does not offer him the ideal yet. Meanwhile, as they are discussing as well, Ryuk does reveal, seemingly by accident, or at least he claims it's an accident, that Misa does not have very long to live. And this leads Light into a secondary path of trying to save Misa from her stalker that's going to kill her. However, in the process of trying to stop her stalker, she actually tells her stalker that her life is limited, and her stalker tricks him and sends him to a false event while he attacks her at the end of the episode. But we'll come back to that. Also, Soichiro does manage to get promoted or transferred. Basically, he reports what L is doing with investigating with the FBI on Japanese soil, and basically the police chief is like, this is not acceptable to us. They're overreaching. We need to separate L's investigation from the regular whole case squad. And so they decide to then move Soichiro into a Kira countermeasures office, separated from them, where he will then work with L directly. And when he arrives there, the rest of the task force also kind of follows him and are let in, and they then become the task force. Light does do the bus hijacking. He picks a criminal after his experiments, and this criminal then hijacks on the bus, and things play out. He does see an ID that says FBI Ray Pember. He also happens to find a picture of Ray and his fiancée, who is Kathy Campbell in this version. But once he's off the bus, after the criminal very obviously stops his attack, smiles, and shoots himself in the stomach, like that wasn't just the most dead giveaway that it was an unnatural situation ever. Anyways, the point being, after that, Light then goes, writes a scenario to kill Ray and kill L at the same time. Unfortunately for him, because it was a fake FBI badge that L had created for Ray, Ray does report to L, but reports that Light is very suspicious. So at the end of the episode, L calls Light and basically says, "Are you Kira? I think you're Kira." And Light has to unfortunately panic with that until the next episode. On Misa's side, she's confronted by the stalker. She gets pushed down the stairs, passes out. When she wakes up, it's dark out. The stalker is lying dead on the ground by her. She looks around, realizing that Kira might have had something to do with it. Of course, in this case, it wasn't actually Kira. Then the red notebook falls from the sky alongside a white feather, and she picks it up. And that is where we leave this episode with Misa. So now that we've been reminded about what happened in the episode, we'll now rank the episode. First, we'll rank on our mostly objective ranking list, which uses set values to determine the score, followed by the personal ranking list, which is based on my personal opinion. So our mostly objective rank values, we first have 1 point each for our single episode supporting characters that I felt were significant enough to make note of. So first we had Yukita Tsutomu, who is the stalker of Misa, who is also the security guard of her building where she lives. And basically, when Light tries to approach Misa and tell her that her life is in danger, he of course is ignored. Misa's rushed away, but Yukita then takes it upon himself to approach Light separately and asks for more details. They then agree to meet up at a fan signing or a meet and greet to try to protect Misa. However, when Light later goes to that meet and greet, Misa's not there. It's a different event. And he calls Yukita, and Yukita basically tells him that it's his job to protect Misa. Misa belongs to him. And of course, he wasn't going to tell Light, who could be a stalker, where she would be. Before then, of course, he hangs up on Light, actually does go ahead and try to get Misa to like him by saying that he had taken care of a stalker for her, but she, of course, is not interested, gets the creepy vibes, ends up slapping him in the face. He then gets angry, pushes her down the stairs, and again, she passes out. And upon waking, he is dead on the ground, killed by Jealous, presumably. Then we have the other criminal of this episode that's highlighted, which is Osureda Kiichiro, who is the man that Light chooses to hijack the bus, who had previously hijacked a bank. However, unlike the anime, which we've already seen, this bus hijacking is a little less well thought out. In the last one, so in the anime, the way that it works is he manages to get the real identity of Ray Pember by him showing him his ID because of the attack. Then the criminal hallucinates by seeing Ryuk, and then it was upon leaving the bus that it was what appeared to be an accidental death. In this one, though, he comes on, starts the hijacking, basically has Light empty everyone's pockets. Light then is able to see the badge, Ray Pember, which in this case, in this series, is considered to be an alias. However, Ray does have a picture in his wallet with him and Kathy Campbell, which Light is able to see while he's going through the pockets, which means even though he doesn't have Ray's name, he does have someone's name. And then, you know, basically, once it reaches the time, even though the hijacking's mid hijacking, he just stops, smiles, and then, you know, ends his life by his own hand. And again, it's so obvious that, like, Ray immediately clocks that, okay, Kira did this because why else would somebody who's successfully hijacking a bus, getting his orders followed, getting the things from everybody's pockets, having put in a demand for money from somewhere else, just randomly decide, okay, I'm bored with this now, I'm just going to boop. Like, nobody would do that. It's so unrealistic. It was obvious from the start. It doesn't look accidental at all. And of course, it does come back to bite Light because he does end up getting that phone call from Elle at the end. But those are our two single episode supporting characters for this episode. We then have the multi-episode supporting character development, which is worth 3 points. And we first have Soichiro, who gets transferred to the countermeasures office to work directly with Elle, and his closer members of the force end up following him there and becoming part of their mini task force. So we have Matsuda, we have Aizawa, we have the new female character that was not in the original. Was it Shoko? And then Mogi, who all come over. So that's 3 points. And then we have the situation with Misa, where she ends up attacked by Yukita. Then wakes up to Yukida dead on the sidewalk, where the notebook comes falling down from the sky alongside a white letter, which, when she picks it up, she is able to see a shadowed Rem. I did not count Rem as being introduced in this episode because while we see Rem, it's literally in the credits scene for like a few seconds. It's not a full, like, it's not enough time with the character for it to be counted as the character's introduction. So I did not give any points for Rem's introduction, but I did want to be fair and note that she was there just very briefly, very much at the end. But that's also worth 3 points. Then we had the world building with the experimenting with the rules, learning more about the Shinigami and why they kill humans. And that is, of course, because when they write a name, they get to take the lifespan that remains from the human, which then extends their own lives and allows them to live. That brings us to a 12 out of 10. However, there was one negative, and that, of course, is the stalking is bad. I was going to say character regression for Light, but then I remembered in this version, the drama version, Light isn't claimed to be a genius, so making silly mistakes like this is actually understandable for the character, unlike in the anime where it was like you're trying to tell us he was a genius and he kept making dumb moves. At least this time they're like, well, he's an average person, so dumb moves are fine. But obviously stalking is bad. Bad behavior, minus 2 points. But that still leaves us with a 10, which does make this another 10 out of 10 episode. Now, with our lists, as always, on the mostly objective ranking list, when more than one episode has the same score, they're just ranked in episode order. And so our list so far is episode 1 in first and episode 2 in second. Which now brings us to the personal ranking. Now, my ranking for this episode is a little bit lower than last episode. I felt like there were some funny moments. There was this hide and seek sort of game with Ray where like Light would glance at him and he'd like try to like shimmy behind like a corner or a post or something to like pretend that he's just some random guy out there, but he'd like look around and I thought that was kind of fun. Obviously, there was this one scene with Ryuk where he decided to steal an apple off of a picnic blanket on the college grounds, and this student is sitting there watching their apple float up, get eaten, and then he just ends up passing out. And Ryuk goes back over to Light, like, whatever. And then, of course, Ryuk is talking about, trying to save Misa and talking about trying to stop Light from going to work because he has other things to focus on. And then Light basically tells him, I didn't want to tell you this, but the apples that I keep feeding you actually aren't free and they do need to be paid for. And then Ryuk basically just gets in front of him and goes, you know what? Go to work. Working is so important. And I thought that was very amazing. Basically, Ryuk is the star of this episode. Of course, the fact that he actually tries to save Misa is different from the anime, that he even knows about the stalker in advance. And I do, again, I mentioned this in the last episode, like that they at least. One of my biggest things about Misa and Light, why I never really got behind them in the anime, was that Light very clearly did not have human emotions, did not care about her whatsoever, didn't even know she existed until she showed up on his doorstep randomly. So giving it that Light is actually a fan, that Light would actually want to help her, want to kill her family's murderer on purpose. Now he wants to save her purposefully. I feel like that lends more credibility to their relationship and also will be less suspicious with regards to the rest. Also, another fun moment, Ryuk does decide to watch a recording of an Ichigo Berry performance in Light's room, and he does try to learn the dances, which again are great. Dancing Ryuk is always fun. But again, like it has these positive moments, but then on that core storyline, the hijacking thing, I just can't get over how badly it was done in comparison to the anime. Like how non-accidental it was, how obviously caused by Kira it was. And then, of course, it ends up being a fake name, so Light then sends Ray off to, try to kill L, and then gets a phone call from L like, haha, I win. I think you're Kira. Obviously hasn't fully won by this point, but the fact is that Light has already made some pretty big mistakes and it was just so obvious. Although I did like the twist of Ray's name being fake. Obviously, in the original anime, it was not fake. In this one, they did make it fake, which I greatly enjoyed because that ups the tension. So, overall, there were some changes I liked, some changes I didn't like. There were a few funny moments, which I did enjoy. And ultimately, I decided to give this episode a 7 because I do feel it is a good episode. It is strong. It has its flaws, and I can't overlook them entirely. But that does leave the personal ranking with episode 1 in first place still, and episode 2 is in second. And that now brings me to the series ranking so far, and on our mostly objective ranking, we have part 1 of the anime in first at 70.77%. We have part 2 of the anime in second with 51.82%. And then we have our live action ranking so far with 20 points out of 110. On our personal ranking side, part 1 came in first place at 60.38%, part 2 in second with 49.09%, and then the live action did come in so far with 17 points out of a possible 110. So with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Deathnote Live Action Episode 2. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.